Hi, hello, welcome back. Bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to get caught up talking about the books that I have been reading. So this will cover books that I read in both June and July of 2023. I really did not read a lot in June, which is why I'm kind of combining these just to kind of catch up. And I didn't read a ton in June because I got sucked into Diablo 4. I have been playing the Diablo series for ever. And so Diablo 4 came out. Alex, my hubby, and we stayed up super late almost every day playing that game like nobody's business. It was a little ridiculous, but that meant that I didn't read that many books. But as usual, before I dive into the books, let's talk about just stats really briefly. So my stats for June, I read 2 books totaling 1,581 pages, which is obviously not a lot. At least I mostly enjoyed both of those books. I have an average rating of 4 stars, so love that for me. And then in July, I read a lot more. I read 8 books, but I think it was a lot of shorter books, so it only totaled 3,928 pages. And a lot of the reading that I've been doing lately is immersion reading, where I have the audiobook going and I kind of follow along. And it's just, I've been very distracted and stressed, and so that is a way that I can just like really focus on what I'm reading. And so the bulk of what I've been doing is immersion reading. And my average rating for the month of July was 4.31 stars, which is awesome. That means that I loved a lot of the books that I read. But without further ado, let's just jump into talking about these 10 books. As usual, we will go from my least favorite read to my favorite read. And I did not separate these by month read since I was only 2 in June. They're just mixed in with the rest. First up, my least favorite book that I read in June and July was Memories of Ice. But that being said, I still give it a pretty good score of 3.75 stars. And this is book 3 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And Mr. Erikson and I don't necessarily love the way that he tells a story for the most part. I find that there is a lot of distance from the characters, and we're supposed to kind of just take the characters as they are in this moment in time, but I kind of like to understand character motivations. Why are we doing what we are doing? What are those impacts? And I feel like unless you really see yourself in the circumstances of his characters, that it tends to be harder for people to connect to these characters, just in my opinion. And then the plots tend to be a little convoluted and cryptic, where you also don't necessarily get this huge bang for your buck in the plot either. I do think that in Memories of Ice, we got a lot more information, especially about the houses of the Azoth and that kind of thing. And so I did like the deepening of the lore and the explanation of a little bit of the world building. But I did find myself while I was reading it a little bit frustrated that I'm like, well, why didn't I get some of this information back in Gardens of the Moon? Like, it would have been nice to have context and understand a lot of what was going on back then, but that is just not how he chooses to tell a story, which is totally fine. I know that there's a lot of people that just love trying to piece together themselves, and when they have that like aha light bulb moment of understanding and kind of piecing it together, that's one of the things that they love about Malazan. And a lot of people feel that that crypticness and not getting information until much later makes the series a lot better on a reread, because then you do have that context. But I find that a little bit frustrating. Like, I shouldn't have to read a 10-book gigantic thick book series to have context to understand the first book. I feel like that is not the best method of world building, at least not for me, but I did quite enjoy this. I didn't love it. So I have been continuing my Malazan journey, and I have already read book 4, which is House of Chains, but I'm not talking about that here. We'll just mosey right along. And the next book I have on here is Before They Are Hanged by Mr. Joe Abercrombie. This is book 2 in the original First Law trilogy, and I gave this book 4 stars. In this case, I feel like the book is so character focused with such a lack of plot that while I do enjoy the characters and their interactions, I'm just not a purely character-driven reader. I do like a good plot. I do like to have something more going on. And so while I do enjoy these characters and this world, and I have since finished the trilogy, so I'm trying to remember my thoughts on Just Before They Are Hanged without the context of The Last Argument of Kings, and I think that's kind of how I felt. It is a good time. I especially enjoy Glocta's inner monologue still. The audiobooks narrated by Mr. Stephen Paisley are phenomenal, and happy that I've now read that book 2, but great. And then up next is another book that I've since finished the trilogy. I've been on a trilogy finishing spree in the month of August, but the next book is The Liar's Knot by M.A. Carey. This is book 2 in the Rook and Rose trilogy, and again, I gave this book 4 stars. And this trilogy is very much political fantasy, and if you like kind of witty banter mixed with political scheming, mixed with kind of Batman meets Venice vibes, then you should 100% check out the Rook and Rose trilogy. It is a lot of fun. Liar's Knot in particular, I really liked the second half, and I find that that's kind of the MO for this series for me, is the first half tends to be kind of slower, more just character dynamics and stuff that I find less interesting, and then the second half is usually the actual like plot stuff that I like a lot more. And so this world, I think one of the things that I really like about it beyond the character banter is the magic system is really cool, and there's kind of these competing magic systems of Numenatria and Pattern. And Pattern is almost like a tarot type magic system, and the Numenatria feels a lot more like science-y or like alchemy from Full Metal Alchemist with like all the drawing and stuff like that. And so the magic is just super cool and fun, and there's lots of twists and turns, and Liar's Knot was another good entry into this series. Then I read the most recent Drizzt trilogy. So this is books 37, 38, and 39 in the larger saga of Drizzt, but this is the most recent trilogy that was released. And so for book 1, Starlight Enclave by Mr. R.A. Salvatore, I gave it 4 stars. This trilogy is not my favorite in the Drizzt saga, and I think that's largely because there wasn't a ton of magic, and the meta plot of the Drizzt saga that we have been having recently isn't really addressed until book 3. So book 1 felt like this more isolated journey to this new enclave of Drow, and I won't say any more than that, but it was fun being back with my friends and kind of exploring this new atmosphere and this new city and this new culture. So it was fun, but it wasn't like my favorite thing ever. And then my final 4-star read of this kind of chunk is City of Blades by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is book 2 in the Divine Cities trilogy. These books are interesting because they feel almost like it's a trilogy of standalones, because while we do have one of the main characters from the first book in this book, the plots feel very separate from one another. And so in this world, there was this kingdom or country or whatever you want to call it, where they had these gods that were present, and these gods affected everything around them, and worship of these gods just like warped everything around them. And so then an invading nation came and started killing these gods, and it had drastic effects. Parts of the city disappeared. Weird things have happened since the gods' influence is no longer there. But that's all kind of like backdrop for what we're doing. And then in books 1 and 2, we're following 2 different kind of mysteries. These books tend to kind of revolve around a central murder mystery, and then we kind of have deepening of the lore from there. This was just another in that series. I enjoyed the mystery. I enjoyed the twists and turns. The characters aren't my favorite. The world is cool, but like usual, I kind of wish that I got to see when the gods were there and there was crazy magic, instead of like, the magic is gone. Like, that's just not my favorite setup to a story. Then I had a 4.25 star read, and I continued my journey through the Chorus of Dragons series, and I read, I want to say this is book 3, The Memory of Souls by Miss Jenn Lyons. And I've since read book 4, and I'm currently reading book 5. And so now I'm trying to remember what specifically happened in Memory of Souls. Memory of Souls had some cool revelations in the world building, and it's just another par for the course. Like, these characters are a lot of fun. The magic is very D&D inspired. The world feels like a D&D adventure, but it's like really cool and different. The way the deities work is really cool and different. And the only thing is that with this series, Ms. Lyons does weird like narrative structures. So each book in this series is written like a book that's in world. And so due to that fact, you have kind of these footnotes where it's the people who wrote those books in world commenting on the story or giving clarification on world building or just snarky asides. And while that can be fun, it can also be a little bit distracting, but the footnotes are not my problem. My problem is we tend to have somebody telling a past story, and then we tend to hop timelines and all over the world, and it can be a little bit disjointed and confusing and clunky in the overall narrative structure. I don't remember how it was in Memory of Souls specifically, but that has been my major complaint with this series so far, is that we are following 5 or 6 different POVs in different timelines, and kind of like, I don't know, it's just a little bit disjointed. And then usually part 1 is kind of catching you up to the current day events, and then part 2 is like pushing forward a meta plot. And I really enjoy the meta plot, but just all of that hopping and jumping all over is just disorienting and a little bit confusing, and just kind of hampers me from totally loving this series. But who knows, maybe I'll feel differently once I finish book 5. Then the next 2 books I both gave 4.5 stars to, and these are books 2 and 3 in that most recent Drizzt trilogy. So that is Glacier's Edge and Lolth's Warrior. And in particular, so Glacier's Edge kind of just gets you set up to have Drizzt involved. So especially in book 1 of this trilogy, we really don't see a whole lot of the titular Drizzt. We see a lot more of Canterbury and other people. I don't want to say because it's kind of spoilery, but there's an inciting incident and then Drizzt gets involved. And then in book 3, we finally move forward with the plot line centering around Lolth and Menzo Berenzin. And I just had so much fun. Like, I just love the Forgotten Realms. I love getting new Forgotten Realms. There's still a lot of Forgotten Realms that I haven't yet read, so at least there's a huge backlog for me to go back to. But it's fun to be back with characters that you've been following since you were in like junior high. So I've been reading these books for probably like 20 years. And so just having new entries with these characters, it's just like comfort reads and just is always fun and serves what I want it to serve. And I always just wait for the whole trilogy to be out and then binge the whole thing. So love that. This new trilogy is great. I definitely don't think that you should start here. If you're curious about the saga of Drizzt, you should just start with the Dark Elf trilogy with Homeland, Exile, and Sojourn. And I know a lot of people are intimidated because we are up to 39 books in this series at this point, but each smaller story, they're usually broken into trilogies. I think there's 1 or 2 quartets in there, but each trilogy has a very satisfying arc. And then you just, if you fall in love with these characters, you just get to keep going on adventures and have these small little arcs with your characters over time. And so it's just a fun, comforting series that if you love the world and you fall in love with these characters, that there's just going to be adventures that you can go on whenever you need it. So I wouldn't look at it as like, oh my God, there's this huge, epic, sprawling story. I'm gonna have to remember so many people and names and places and blah, blah, blah. I would say that it's not like that. It's not something like Wheel of Time or Malazan where it's this huge, massive story with all of this deep complexity. These are fun, kind of self-contained adventures that you just get to go on with your friends if you like these characters, and it will be a nice contained plot in each trilogy. There's not really like some huge overarching meta plot connecting all of it. You're just going on adventures with your friends and watching them grow, going through different life events with them. And so I would just highly recommend you check it out if it sounds at all interesting. And then my final 4.5 star read of the month was The Foxglove King by Hannah Whitten. This is book 1 in a new series from her called The Nightshade Crown. And this is a young adult fantasy series that is so cool. This, kind of similar to the Divine Cities trilogy, is set in this world where the gods at one point kind of fought each other, and the goddess of death was killed, and her body is underneath this city and kind of leeches this almost necromantic energy. And there are people in this world that can channel that energy, and they have to, because sometimes if there's uplands of that energy, since it's like this necrotic energy, it will literally just kill people when it comes in contact with them. And so you have people that can kind of channel this necromantic energy, and they can also use it to do things like raise the dead, to ask them questions and that kind of thing. And so if you like fast-paced, cool, magic, like kind of adventure type stories, I think The Foxglove King is great. And it also does have like romantic elements to it that I found at times a little bit annoying, but they were not like a huge major focus, at least not in my opinion. The major focus was like trying to figure out how to control this death magic, and then there was a little bit of other plotting and political maneuvering towards the end that I just thought was a lot of fun. So if that sounds good, you should definitely check it out, because I almost hear nobody talk about it, and it is really fun. And then the last thing on my list, so this would be my favorite of that 2-month period, I gave it 5 stars, was Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 3rd secret project, and I gave it 5 stars immediately after finishing it. But Yumi and the Nightmare Painter sticks with me less than something like Tress, but it was just a fun reading experience. And this was the first time that I actually got the physical copy while I was reading, so I actually got to enjoy some of the deluxe feeling of the 2 different colors of ink and all of the artwork, because usually if I'm reading it on my Kindle, I have to swap to my phone to see the colors, and so that kind of messes up the flow of that experience. But Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is a lot of fun. It is very much rooted in an anime aesthetic and inspiration. You have your hot spring scene, you have your ramen house scene. There's a lot of like staple scenes that are kind of tropey in an anime way. So I think if you're somebody who's really into anime and really likes that kind of Tokyo aesthetic, I think Yumi is great. I also think it's great for people who don't know much about the Cosmere. This book, while it does have mentions of larger things in the Cosmere, and of course, if you're a super Cosmere buff, there are things that you can try to piece about how the larger system works and at what point in the timeline does Yumi, but like there's nothing in this one that would spoil any of the other Cosmere series. It's just kind of the standalone, fun thing, and it is a story with a strong romantic element to it. And I think it's one of Sanderson's better romances that I've read. It was kind of heartwarming and wholesome, and it's just a cool world. I don't want to say too much about the world because a lot of the fun is just kind of figuring out the world as you go. But if you like Sanderson, obviously you've probably already read it. If you don't usually read Sanderson and you are somebody who likes a strong romantic element in their story that's wholesome and not spicy whatsoever, but you just like to see the cute interactions and the kind of like dates and like that kind of thing and getting to know each other, then I think Yumi would really scratch that itch for you. But that concludes the list of the 10 books that I read in the last couple of months. If you've read any of these that you'd like to talk to me about, please feel free to leave comments down below. If you want to talk spoilers for anything, of course, just write spoilers and then hit enter a bunch of times so that you don't spoil it for anybody else. But if you just want to leave an emoji, maybe leave like a sleeping face or a bed for Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, since Nightmare is in the title. But that will do it for today's video. So please like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more bookish shenanigans like this from me. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!